All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we begin our webinar today, I want to go over some housekeeping. As you join us, I invite you all to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please share your name, your school, or where you're calling in from today. We'd love to get to know you a bit. We also thank you in advance for your patience if there's any technical difficulties that we're experiencing. For today's webinar, please keep your mic muted the whole time. We are really excited to have your engagement and questions come through the chat, and we encourage that today. If you would like closed captions enabled, you can click that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then finally, we do have a survey at the end of the event, and we would really appreciate it if you could share your feedback in that survey. And then with that, I am so excited to welcome everyone here to our NCWIT AIC Lab event, Step into Quantum Computing with Dr. Margaret Martinosi. My name is Lauren, and I am the NCWIT Aspirations in Computing Community Program Manager. My colleague and our Community Engagement Manager, TJ Aladdin, is helping out in the chat today. Please say hello. And then we are so excited to have Dr. Martinosi with us to discuss the current state of quantum computing, the emerging opportunities, and the critical role of computer scientists, and of course, the need for every level of talent, not just the PhD students. You're going to discover how you can break into this exciting and rapidly expanding field, and then you'll be able to learn some practical steps to start your quantum journey. Now, we opened up our AIC lab today to folks outside of the community, so I do want to just introduce who NCWIT is. Founded in 2004 by Lucy Sanders, NCWIT widens inclusion in the technical workforce through innovative programs and research. NCWIT is a nonprofit and a community of over 1,600 change leader organizations that span from K-12 into higher ed, and then into the industry. And we're all working to expand access to critical knowledge and opportunities. The NCWIT Aspirations in Computing Program, or AIC, encourages students to explore their careers in computing and technology by offering awards opportunities in community. And one of the opportunities within AIC is this AIC Lab series. And this is where we explore research skills and ideas with our community. Now we have a really great and informative agenda for today. We're going to begin the webinar with speaker introductions, and then Dr. Martinosi is going to deliver her presentation about quantum computing. Next, Lucy Sanders will lead a fireside chat with Dr. Martinosi. And we do encourage you to ask your questions for either Lucy, Dr. Martinosi, or generally about quantum computing into the chat during the presentation and fireside chat, because we're going to be curating those, and I will be asking them to our guest speakers. And then we will close up after our Q&A with some closing remarks, and we'll all be on our way. Now, it is my sincere honor to introduce our very esteemed guest speaker, Lucy Sanders. Lucy is a visionary leader and has made an immense impact on technology and diversity, and truly she is recognized and awarded nationwide. Lucy is the co-founder of NCWIT, which established the nation's foremost advocate for gender equity in computing. So we are so honored to have her speaking to our community today. Presently, she's working on individual projects such as leading the Quantum Tech Innovation Hub, which is currently the only designated one out of the federal government. She also has a long and successful career of research and development at the VP level at AT&T Bell Labs. Lucy, we're so excited to have you here. I welcome you to our virtual stage to help us introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. Super excited to introduce Dr. Martinosi. I've known her for quite some time. We've both been on the same pathway, if you will, working in computing areas, as well as making sure that we work on inclusion and diverse computing pathways for everybody. So it's an honor to have her here. As Lauren said, I've started to work a little bit in the quantum computing spaces, and I'm a software engineer, by background and by profession. And listening to her, the first time I heard her was at a Computing Research Association meeting where she was talking about computing architecture. And I go, oh my gosh, this is so interesting to me. And then when I started working on quantum computing, it became even more interesting. And I think you'll see why when Dr. Martinozzi starts to speak. She is a very esteemed and distinguished person. And as I was looking back on her career, I noticed a recent press release that she was just named a university professor at Princeton. And that is a great honor. There are only 25 of them. I think that's right. And it just says everything about her career. It wraps everything up. She is a technology leader. She has made advances in all kinds of areas. She's an endowed professor and has been for quite some time at Princeton. She also took a spin through the NSF, rotating out last year to run the computing directorate. And so I'm super happy to have you here, Margaret. And I'm going to hand it over to you so everybody can hear about quantum computing, which is pretty fascinating. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you to everyone at NCWIT for giving us this place to get together and talk about this. Let me share screen. And does that look good? Can people see it okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So it's wonderful to get the chance to chat in this way. It's mostly going to be a fireside chat, but they encouraged me to start with a little bit of PowerPoint. And so this is just kind of to set the stage a little bit, and then we'll move on to something that's more conversational. And I hope you bring your questions and your curiosities to that part of it and drop things into the chat. So I wanted to start with a little bit about, you heard a little bit about who I am. I'm a professor. Lucy mentioned that I just got named to be a university professor, and one of my PhD students said to me, maybe it's a language barrier, but I thought you were a university professor all this time. And I was like, well, yeah, but now it's a capital U and a capital P. So it's a sort of honorific, but I've been a university professor for over 30 years. I work in computer hardware design, so computer architecture. And it's actually been quite a while since I started taking baby steps from quote unquote normal computer architecture into quantum. And this is the story of how that happened. I was waiting at a department coffee machine. It looked like the one you see on the slide. This is before Keurig would let you brew 1 cup at a time. So you had to wait for the whole pot to brew. And while I was waiting, my colleague Steve Lyon walked up, and together we're waiting for this coffee to brew. And he had a real idea for a novel underlying technology that you could build quantum computers out of. So basically a novel way to build a quantum bit, which we call a qubit. And as the coffee brewed, he not only described this sort of low-level thing, he didn't describe it just at the level of it's like a transistor, but he talked about the different ways that the hardware and software layers might be designed around his kind of qubit. And he pulled me in with curiosity. We started co-advising a PhD student to say, if this kind of qubit existed and could be built and could be made reliable, how would you design an architecture around it? That's what the student worked on. That's what his PhD thesis was about. So fast forward nearly 20 years, and I went from sort of that half a student focus on quantum to more and more students focusing on quantum, in part because what I see is that the things that we do in what's called classical computer science, that is normal computer science, that is the non-quantum part of our space, we're really good at learning how to program things, learning how to scale things, learning how to manage complexity, learning how to hide complexity. And quantum needs all of that. And so basically we can take our toolkit from the classical side and bring it to quantum. I'm going to tell you 2 different origin stories. So why has sort of quantum computing emerged at all? So one origin story goes back to Moore's Law. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Moore's Law, but it's from the 60s. And it was basically Gordon Moore sketching out his conjecture about how we might scale the number of transistors on chip based on trying to stay at the cost-effective design point as we got better and better at decreasing the size of transistors. And so he had this kind of audacious statement that as the costs of building transistors dropped, we'd keep finding the lowest cost operating point, which is kind of the bottom of these U-shaped curves. And it would put us on an exponential for the number of transistors on chip. And what's audacious about it is he did this in 1965. He had almost no data, but he drew it out, he conjectured, and actually he caused an entire industry to stay on this doubling curve, to keep investing in order to stay on this doubling curve. And it's been a great ride, but we're running out of sort of classical options, transistor-based options for continuing to scale performance and integration in this way. So I won't go into the details of this slide, but it basically shows things leveling off as the years since that original Moore's Law projection were made. What's interesting is this graph. So bear with me. This graph says, kind of like the original Moore's Law graph, it says like how many calculations per second can we do for a certain cost? Like if I had $1,000 in 1905, how many calculations per second could I do? It would be down here. If I had $1,000 in 1960, how many calculations per second could I do? It's around here. And what you can see is that actually across many different technologies, not just the transistor, but go further back to these much more primitive relays and mechanical adding machines and so forth. For many years, we've been on an exponential doubling curve, very similar to what Moore projected. But the difference is we're about to kind of run out of the transistor and integrated circuit part of this curve. And the question is, what's next? So this is a real disruptive moment. And I hope that as sort of budding computer scientists, you'll continue to look out for these disruptive moments of what's next and try to think about how you can bring your creativity and your ideas into what might be next. One of the things that people think might be next as a way to get good performance to scale into the next generation is quantum computing. And so that's one of the reasons why we might spend time looking at it. There's another origin story for quantum computing, and if you're a physicist, maybe this is the one you're more familiar with. Richard Feynman, who's a very famous American physicist from Caltech, is one of 3 people credited with thinking about how they might use quantum mechanical systems to simulate quantum mechanical systems. And Feynman had a great way of putting it. He basically, in a talk, he sketched out literally the volume and the wattage, everything that would be needed to do a very detailed simulation of a large quantum mechanical system. And he decided there's no way you can do this classically, because to get to very large systems and model them in detail, the computer would have to be vast and more power than we could imagine and so forth. So basically he said, this is a problem that is intractable for a normal computer. We need to think about using quantum mechanical elements to simulate quantum mechanical systems in detail. And that's where this idea of a quantum computer came from. It's the idea of using quantum mechanical elements as the computational elements rather than more traditional semiconductors. Okay, so where's the computer science in all of this? Well, what's interesting, so that was 40 years ago. Why do we still care? We care because to this day, and actually more than ever, quantum computing offers the potential to take problems that are truly intractable and solve them. So some of the intractable problems have to do with things like finding the ground state energy or finding particular bonding properties in chemical systems, at the quantum mechanical level. Why does that matter? That matters because that can actually help with drug design for pharmaceuticals. It can also help with things as sort of seemingly mundane as agriculture. If you get better understanding of the quote unquote catalysts that happen in different chemical systems, you can build out better fertilizers to get better crop yields. So there's a range of really complex, intractable problems in chemistry, in simulation, and in optimization that may be tractable if we shift from transistors to quantum elements. And so basically there's this new industry forming and a new scaling curve trying to accelerate these applications. It's not going to be a full replacement. You're not going to have a quantum computer in your phone. You're not going to have a quantum computer in your laptop, but it might help in key places. And it will also likely feed back insights. It already is feeding back insights to how we might do better in classical computing in the meantime, while we still have some of Moore's law to ride out. The other thing I wanted to say, up front and early is it's here right now. There are prototypes available. IBM, Amazon, and others are making prototype quantum computers available on the web so that you can either program them directly or simulate them. And they continually are making available larger and larger ones that are sort of larger in their capabilities and also higher in fidelity. What does fidelity mean? It means they get the right answer more of the time. In regular computers, in classical computers, we're used to them getting the right answer a lot of the time. In quantum computers, one of the challenges has been that they're very sensitive to noise, they're very sensitive to outside effects, so they get the wrong answer a lot of the time if they're unduly affected by that noise. And we'll talk about that more later. So digging a little bit deeper, quantum computing basically represents a fundamentally new paradigm. Instead of a regular bit that is either 1 or 0, up or down, a qubit or a quantum bit is a probabilistic superposition of 0 and 1. So it might be some fraction alpha of 0 and some fraction beta of 1. And you can see in this thing that's called a Bloch sphere, that if this vector is pointing all the way up, then the qubit state is a full 0. If the vector is pointing all the way down, the qubit state is a 1. The qubit state is encoded in some quantum mechanical attribute. So if you've taken a chemistry class, you might have heard about spin. Electrons have a spin. So maybe you consider spin up and spin down to be this probabilistic 0 and 1 in a qubit. Atomic energy levels is the electron in the ground state or one of the sort of valence bands of an atom. So this is kind of where we are in terms of the physics of it. And I think one of the things that I will be honest about is when you hear about quantum computing, you inevitably hear a little bit more physics than when you hear about classical computing. So a lot of people get into classical computing without really learning how a transistor works. We know that they're down there in our computers, but we don't learn how they work. Quantum computing is a little bit newer, a little bit earlier in its timeline. And so we're still at the point of how the technology works gets interwoven into how we use it, how we program it. Moving a little bit further, one of the things, so the qubit is how we hold on to some piece of information. We need gates, right? In a classical computer, we have AND gates and OR gates that manipulate the information. In quantum computers, we have gates too, and they are a single qubit gate is some transformation of the vector. So we might have a vector that's pointing, as you can see here, it's a blue vector and it's pointing up and to the right. And so a NOT gate in the quantum world would flip that vector so that it's instead pointing down and to the left. So that's a form of inversion. And I'm a computer architect, so I love to find places where I can pull from the classical world and find sort of familiar themes. One of the things that we need to do for quantum computing is decide what is the useful set of operations, what are the useful set of gates that the quantum computer will implement. So for a classical machine, we might have AND gates and OR gates down low. And then assembly language programming might have things like addition and multiply. We're still picking out what is the sort of useful and buildable set of operations for quantum. And I think that's one of the interesting things for computer scientists and computer engineers to be able to work on. So qubits are the kind of basic building block. There's two more bits of physics we have to wade through before we can get to the sort of programming side of things. So there's two things that we can do because of the quantum that are going to help us get speed ups. So one thing is this superposition, that a qubit isn't all 0 or all 1. It is some probabilistic representation of some 0 and some 1. And we call that a superposition of states. The other thing, and it's even more kind of surprising and hard to get your head wrapped around, is what's called an entanglement of states between qubits. And this is about correlations between qubit states once they're entangled. Einstein himself found this physical property unusual enough that he called it spooky action at a distance. So, if Einstein is on the records calling it this, it's a little bit non-intuitive. So let's talk about what entanglement looks like. Let's say that we have two coins. Now, people don't ever entangle things as big as physical coins. They're entangling tiny things like electrons. But let's imagine for a moment that we could actually think about these two coins as entangled. Entanglement would say that once I do some magic entanglement operation, like rub them together, their states are correlated. That would say that if I know that my coin is heads, I would get other information, additional information about whether the other coin is also heads or not. And in particular, that information, once entangled, stays entangled even at a distance. And so if I take one coin, hold it to myself, and I give Lucy the other coin that we've entangled together, and then I quietly look at my coin and I see that it says heads, because of the correlation, because of the entanglement, I actually learn additional information about Lucy's coin to know that it too may be heads. And not only is this sort of non-intuitive in the kind of basic version of this, it's particularly non-intuitive because some entangled correlations have already been physically demonstrated at distances over 1,000 kilometers. So this is a very surprising thing. The combination of superposition and entanglement means that with relatively few qubits, we can represent very large states. So for example, if I think about a 10 qubit computer, I can actually represent 2 to the 10th states. If I think about 100 qubit computer, I can represent 2 to the 100th states. And when I'm representing 2 to the 100th states, that's like 2 to the 100th memory locations, that is bigger than any classical computer we've ever built. And so even though 100 qubits may not sound like much, we're already building 100 qubit computers. They have very large state spaces. We just need to manage some of the complexities around the noise and the reliability. So that's where quantum computing offers this potential for an exponential speedup. It's because with each additional qubit that you give me, I double the compute power and the representation power of the system that I'm building. So, but there are challenges. So challenge number one is to controllably manipulate the state of these qubits without disrupting others. The very fact that they're very reactive with each other means that they're also very reactive to noise in the environment. And so they don't stay at some superposition level very long. They're constantly kind of subsiding back to the ground state. They decohere. Because of these sort of noise sensitivities and decoherence, we need a lot of hardware error correction to try to maintain reliability. That's great. We're starting to do better and better on quantum error correction, but it requires 10x or 100x more qubits than just the base case. So managing control complexity and noise at scale and memory, these are all challenges of quantum hardware. And we're working our way through them. but there's a ways to go. So where are we? This is a very cartoonish graph, but what it shows is kind of years from 1995 to the present and beyond, and it shows qubits on the y-axis, and the yellow line is roughly what we're able to build. So we're kind of now into the order of hundreds of qubits, aspiring towards maybe 1,000 qubits. And the blue items up here are the number of qubits that are needed for different quantum algorithms. And the reason why I've started this graph in 1995 is because that's when a very interesting thing happened. Peter Shor, a researcher at Bell Labs, was sort of inspired by Feynman's talk about quantum computers. And he said, I wonder if I could come up with an algorithm to factor large numbers using, postulating if I had a quantum computer, how would I use it to factor large numbers? And he came up with a really profound discovery. So factoring large numbers is really hard. In fact, it's considered NP complete. It is exponential in difficulty. And what Shor identified was that there is a way to use quantum computers to factor large numbers that seems to offer exponential speed up. So that's great. There's one more thing that makes this really important and relevant. A lot of the crypto systems that we use to protect data, financial data, when you want to encrypt a file on your laptop, everything, a lot of those crypto systems rely on the assumption that factoring large numbers will be intractable. And so Shor's algorithm says that if someone could build a sufficiently large and capable quantum computer and hide it in their basement, they'd be able to decrypt the world's data. That's a pretty eye-popping thing to imagine. And so it's kept people motivated about quantum algorithms for a long time. But here's the thing. Shor's algorithm and another algorithm called Grover's have huge resource requirements, thousands or millions of qubits. And so there's a huge gap between what they need and what anyone can build. So nobody's got anything in their basement that comes anywhere close to endangering Shor's algorithm. So there's also been some hardware progress. We don't actually know what the slope of this yellow line of buildable qubits will be. It seems to be accelerating pretty well, and so the gap might be shrinking. The other thing that's happening is there's new quantum algorithms that have lower qubit requirements, and that are kind of more imaginable to implement sooner. So while nobody's going to be able to implement Shor's anytime soon, there's some interesting optimization in quantum chemistry algorithms that are implementable soon that could be sort of demonstrating usefulness much sooner. So in short, I think one of the things that I want people to remember is a lot of conversations about quantum home in on, well, IBM has, 100 qubits, and this other company has 80 qubits, and this other company has more or less qubits. That's not the only thing to think about. What matters is their noise sensitivity, how many gates can be executed, and so forth. And I don't have time to go into the details, but I just wanted to kind of instill in you the sense that qubit counts are not the only thing that matters. So what do? I work in this opportunity space between what the algorithms want and what we can build. And I say, are there ways that programming tools and design tools can move the feasibility point years earlier to create useful quantum systems, useful quantum algorithms much earlier? And I think this is a real opportunity for a lot of computer scientists. I'm trying not to go over time on this part of the talk, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Here's an analogy. In 1950, in classical computing, computers looked a little bit like this picture here. We had computers that were made out of vacuum tubes or relay circuits. We actually didn't build a computer out of transistors until later in the 1950s. And yet, in 1950, Alan Turing wrote a paper that launched the field of AI, saying, can machines think? So the thing that blows my mind is machines could barely multiply in 1950, and yet he was already wondering about whether they could think. So we had this big gap between what algorithms were imagining and what physical systems could build. That's the classical world, and quantum is very much in that position right now. We know what happened on the classical side. We built out this beautiful stack to manage complexity and abstraction. And the question now for us as computer scientists is, let's do it again. How do we organize the to-do list of these many things that need to happen? How do we build programming languages? How do we build compilers? How do we build error correcting codes for this quantum world? And there's a bunch of different super interesting opportunities in this space. Some of it will be classical programming of things like a compiler in order to compile problems for a quantum system. So there's opportunities to start from a fairly basic programming knowledge and get in, or to kind of dig deeper into some of the quantum effects and work on those instead. So there's opportunities at different levels. In terms of kind of takeaways, quantum computing is not going to replace Moore's law. You're not going to have a quantum computer on your phone. It's going to be unique special purpose hardware, maybe in a data center with some focused applications like pharmaceuticals and so forth that are really sort of potentially game changing places where you can actually think about taking intractable problems and make them tractable. The exciting thing to me is that we can take our classical CS way of thinking and bring it into quantum to offer really orders of magnitude improvements in runtime and success rate. And this ability to kind of bring ourselves from the classical CS world and use those experiences and that toolkit in quantum has kept me excited about this field for years, and now more excited than ever. If you want more info, there's a few reports and other things here. I can make these slides available so that you can grab these links and take a look at them maybe after the talk. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing and move to the next part. Thanks.
Thanks, Margaret. That was great. I'm sitting there taking notes, Can I have your slides? I want all your slides. And I just want to encourage everybody to start putting questions in the chat. I've got a few of my own, but we'll every once in a while kind of shift over and try to take a question from the chat as well. Your last slide really was great in terms of traditional computing, right? And where quantum computing is going from a full stack perspective, right? And I'm wondering if you can say just one more word about that, and that what would happen in a hybrid kind of world, right? It's pretty clear we're not going to have quantum computers on our phones or on our desktop, but that it will be special purpose. What kind of things happen between the two? In other words, will traditional computing talk to a quantum computer and get some things done and then come back? And so you've got in some sense, a hybrid world going on.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, at different levels. So at a higher level, one of the things that's going to happen is some of you might be a little bit familiar with machine learning, which often uses gradient descent techniques to kind of choose a next step in a training scenario and then evaluate around that next point. In the quantum world, there are optimization techniques that are going to be similar to that. They're going to use classical gradient descent to kind of choose the next place to look for something. Like, I wonder in this drug design, if I switched some aspect of the design a little bit, might it get better? So they're going to use classical techniques to choose the next spot to evaluate. And then they're going to use the quantum computer to do that evaluation with its sort of quantum mechanical qubit way of emulating the physical world. So then it's going to go back to the classical side and say, here's what I got. Where should we go next? And classical side will pick the next design point to evaluate and so forth. So that's an example where it's going back and forth classical to quantum at a fairly high level. The other place where it's going to go back and forth is, I mentioned quantum error correction a couple times. And let me sort of first remind people a little bit about classical ECC. So inside your phone, inside your laptop, inside the data centers that we use every day, every data that is stored is protected by a little bit of error correction. So it might be a few extra bits that are called parity bits that check whether any of the classical storage items accidentally flip from 0 to 1. So we already use error correction every day. I can guarantee you every single computer that's connected to the Zoom is using it. That's classical error correction. But because quantum is more error prone, we need fancier error correction. And one of the ways that we envision it happening is we're going to run the quantum computer a little bit. We're not going to be able to measure individual qubits, but we can kind of measure what's called syndromes. We can measure aspects of nearby qubits and get information about the main data qubit. That measuring aspects of nearby qubits is called syndrome measurement. And what happens with that syndrome measurement is it generates some data that we bring over to a classical computer and we analyze. Right now, the quote-unquote syndrome analysis is happening in a pretty low level, a little bit grungy way on hardware that's called a field programmable gate array, an FPGA. But imagine if instead of operating sort of on these grungy FPGAs, imagine if you could do that syndrome analysis on a CPU or on a GPU. You could get much richer ways of diagnosing the problems that you're seeing on the quantum side. And so that quantum error correction back and forth between run the quantum system a little bit, then use syndrome analysis on the classical system, then send those corrections back to the quantum system. That back and forth is another huge and interesting opportunity, I think, for classical people to provide real benefits that will probably be the crux of getting quantum to be practical.
Exactly, and to have the practical applications. And I see we have questions coming in too. So I'll switch a bit from the technical stuff with just maybe one comment that, when Margaret showed that really beautiful picture of the golden thing, that's a quantum sort of, they call them refrigerators or something that keeps these quantum qubits. Very, very cool. And if you're in Colorado, there is one turned up at Colorado School of Mines. And we like to think of it as the coldest place in the universe. And so they are being built today. Maybell Computers is building them as well in Colorado. So these do exist, and they really are pretty interesting platforms. So let's switch a bit into some, one more application question, possibly. You mentioned, really being able to decrypt, algorithms, which is one of the interesting, of course, the government's very interested in that, right? And there's a lot of competition with other countries and, to try to get all this and be ahead of it all, right? And can you talk a bit about individualized medicine? Because that's also something I think that's very interesting to people. And there's a question in the chat about that, what other kinds of applications excite you? Individualized medicine excites me because the older I get, I'm tired of being a guinea pig for drugs, and if they could model me, Lucy, and then know at a doctor's visit that this drug would really work for me or not work for me, there's a promise of that, isn't there? This notion of moving to individualized medicine.
Sure. So if you think about, there's a lot of questions like, what are quantum computers good for? Different variations of that. So if you think about what are quantum computers good for? In many cases, what they're good for is, I'll call them needle in a haystack problems that can be expressed in some mathematical way and mapped to a physical system. So for example, with sort of precision medicine or individualized medicine, you're taking a very large search space, which is sort of all possible drug designs for all possible people, and you're looking for the needle in that haystack, which is, what's the right drug for Lucy or for Margaret right now? And so if you can express that as something like an optimization problem with the right parameters and so forth, then you can use a quantum computer to solve it. And if you have enough high fidelity gates, it will solve it well. The key thing is that often you're taking some abstract problem or an optimization problem, and you're trying to map it to something that looks like a physics problem. So a lot of these optimization problems get turned into a rephrasing of, how do I make this look like I'm looking for the ground state energy of a chemical system? Once I can reframe it in a particular way, then the needle in the haystack becomes sort of a mathematical optimization looking for the lowest point, where the lowest point becomes kind of the best option for a drug design tailored to a particular genome, to a particular person. So that's, I think, one of the places where there's some promise, with the challenge being whenever there's like a large input, like a large database has to come into a quantum computer, those are tricky. What made factoring, what made Shor's algorithm so sort of well suited to quantum is it is a needle in a haystack problem. Looking for the two numbers that multiply together to make some huge number is extremely hard. So it's like a needle in a haystack. But when you find them, you can multiply them together easily and check that you did it right. And so there are these different strategies that get made for how to map from challenging classical problems into the set of things that quantum computers do well.
And let's just sort of end some. There are a lot of technical questions in the chat, and we'll save the chat, and hopefully we can get people some answers to some of those. But to remind people, Margaret put up some papers from the Computing Research Association, CRA, every 5 years. I guess they've done it twice now. So twice now. They've put a paper out on quantum computing. That's a really good resource. And then Fred Chong just did, I think, an NSF sponsored session on quantum algorithms. And in particular, he did a lot of work on what Margaret was talking about in terms of hybrid, going back and forth and things like that between the two. So we can make some of those resources available so you can go and learn more about that. And then one last thing on resources, and then I think we're going to get into some career pathing kinds of questions. IBM has terrific educational resources. I'm not going to say this just right, but there's something called SysKit or KissKit or something.
So IBM has Qiskit.
Yeah.
Amazon has Bracket, and NVIDIA has CUDA-Q, and they're all pretty cool. And many of them allow you to simulate algorithms on your laptop up to a certain point. So they're a great place to get started with a lot of learning materials.
Yeah, and they're all free, and then there's a resource called the Unitary Foundation, which is open source, which is also pretty interesting. You can go take a look at them. There's a lot more, and I'll speak for Margaret and myself. We're happy to point people in different directions. We're learning a lot. I am through my work with Elevate Quantum, where some of those things are. And I mean, I think at this point, maybe I'm going to stop and ask TJ or Lauren, is there a particular question from the chat you want to throw in here right now?
Hey, Lucy and Margaret. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. We have so many curious minds asking questions, as you can see. A lot of great technical questions. Would you like to receive a technical question or more on the career pathway? What are your...
I think we should switch a little bit because I know people are interested in both, right? Mm-hmm. So pick a career pathway kind of question, and let's start there.
Perfect. We have a question from an attendee, and she asks, since quantum computing is still in its beginning phase, would you recommend students joining the workforce sometime in the next 5 years to pursue this field?
I think the opportunities are huge now, and I have great optimism that they will continue. So you have to follow your passions and so forth, but I think there are huge opportunities. in this field, and you can either join the industry part of the quantum workforce, or you can stay in school and maybe stay on the research side of the workforce. And there's different trade-offs there, but I would say that quantum has a very rich set of industry opportunities, both large companies, we already mentioned Amazon, Google, IBM, NVIDIA, but also an incredibly exciting startup space.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that Lucy also mentioned already is, there are the companies that are literally trying to build qubits, but around that is an ecosystem of all the other things that need to get done. So what's the interconnect between the quantum system and the classical system going to look like? The refrigeration, every quantum talk has that beautiful picture of the refrigerator, the dilution refrigerator that Lucy already mentioned, that beautiful brass thing. That's essentially a really fancy refrigerator to help with the noise isolation, so that these qubits can be very close to absolute zero, to help them with their fidelity. And so actually there's as much cutting edge work going into building those refrigerators as there is going into building the qubits themselves. Now, I don't know whether your parents will get a little upset if you say you're going to go build fancy refrigerators, but the point is that this quantum ecosystem is very big, and it includes both sort of opportunities on the academic side and on the industry side.
And you can look up companies there, Inflection, Atom Computing, Maybell. There are quite a few, Quantinuum, some bigger than others, but quantum sensors, quantum networking, quantum computing, and I was touring Vescent, which is, I think, a quantum sensor company, and I asked them, how many software people are you hiring? And we're a software company now, because of all the things Margaret talked about, the error correction, the system testing, all the different things they do to make sure that their products are reliable, and out there. And so that is maybe let's get into the kinds of skills people need. Okay, so Margaret showed like a full stack of different kinds of types of technical skills needed. And I'd love you to sort of maybe talk a bit about this kind of scenario. So some of these companies tell us at Elevate Quantum that they would hire a high school senior into technician roles, right? That they need lab experience in high school. Some have gone so far as to hire people who make jewelry into some of these roles because of the fine motor skills, and of course, and then some hire PhDs. And so can you do a little bit more, tell us about that range of skills, because there really are jobs for everybody right now in many of these companies.
So there's a range of skills in terms of kind of the training expected, and then there's also a range of topic areas as well. So I feel obliged to say that our country really needs more people to pursue advanced degrees in computing. Across many fields, quantum and many others, our country is short on people with advanced degrees to go into the research areas of computing. And so I just can't be in a situation like this without saying that. On the other hand, there are certainly opportunities at all parts of the career path. And you could imagine using some of the opportunities to get unique hands-on experience that would help you decide what next opportunity you're interested in pursuing. So there are kind of on the tangible side, there are these technician roles, whether it is kind of being the person, I have really shaky hands, so it wouldn't be me, but being the person with really non-shaky hands to wire up different systems and those elaborate brass refrigerators, and to work on kind of the mechanics of those kinds of systems. Conversely, there's a lot on the software side. So I find all of my physicsy and electrical engineering colleagues that are building qubits, they're pulling in students who are comfortable programming and comfortable writing designs for FPGAs and so forth to do the work on the essentially the classical infrastructure that sits around a quantum computer, to do things like the error correction, the data collection, and so forth. So there's really a rich set of opportunities: high school, community college, master's, PhD. And I think one of the things that I find really exciting about the field is it's a bit more wide open. So, I mean, we're sort of inundated with headlines about other topic areas like AI and so forth. Certainly, they're very interesting, but I think quantum is much more wide open in terms of where it's going to go and what the opportunities are. And we just don't have that many chances in our professional lives to be present at the creation of something that is as new and exciting as this. And so to me, that's one of the things that makes me really passionate about the opportunities for young people in the field. The other thing I'll say is about majors. So I think someone in the chat asked about different majors. NC-WIT, I would imagine that many of the folks who join are on the CS side of things. And indeed, there's plenty of opportunities to be a CS major and go into quantum. There's also opportunities to be an electrical engineering major, a physics major, material science, and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways in, and often you're going to want to kind of have a nice mixing of topic areas. So we just started a quantum science and engineering PhD program, and there are other universities starting quantum science and engineering master's programs, recognizing that you might come from different topic areas, but there's a place where you're going to want to mix things. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen that too, in terms of 4-year degrees, 4-year post-secondary degrees in areas like, full stack quantum computing. A lot of departments are starting to build those, but they don't necessarily have them yet, right? They're really trying to think through how can that be made more specific and helpful to students, who want to get into the space and or pursue a graduate degree. So thumbs up on that comment. We need more educators at the post-secondary level at all, even 2-year degrees in high school, every place. And I want to turn back to Lauren. Did you see any other kinds of questions in the chat? 'Cause I know we're getting close here. Anything else you think we should answer?
Well, yes, I'm going to summarize some in this next one as well.
Okay.
We do have in our audience today students who are high schoolers and then also college, and we have also young professionals in the audience. And we do have our NC-WIT Career Fair coming up this August, and we have 4 quantum computing companies who will be there. So I'm wondering if you can help advise candidates for internships or jobs on how to best approach quantum computing companies, whether that's networking with them or seeking out certain internships, and if you have any advice there.
Sure. So I think one thing that's true kind of for all job searches everywhere is to kind of take stock of your expertise and your skills and then be confident about it, right? So you need to own that, whether you're a high school or a college or wherever, that you have things to offer and that people should want to hire you. So start there, because there's a lot of data that says that many of us might choose not to apply for a position unless we tick every single box that gets mentioned anywhere in the ad. And so my top level advice is, if you're interested in the position and you tick one of the 10 boxes, you should go for it. See what happens. So that's my first bit of advice. The second thing is that if you maybe want to go from ticking one box to ticking 2 boxes, there are these things like IBM Quantum Learning and other online resources that let you get up to speed on some of the basic jargon and the basic concepts of quantum, so that you'll feel more comfortable in an interview situation right off the bat. And there are quantum summer schools and then these free online resources that you can use to kind of self-teach a little bit more, to fill in places where you just like to, you feel like you'd be more comfortable in an interview if you had those skills. But the other thing I will say is an awful lot of what quantum companies need right now is different kinds of either programming experience or hardware design experience or linear algebra experience. And most people in our field have a bit of that. And so just know that the quantumness need not be like the first and primary box to tick. You bring a lot of skills, whether you're deeply versed in quantum or not.
That's right.
I feel like Lucy must have more to add here.
Well, and I just want to reinforce all of that. Quickly, I would say this, that the companies we talk to they're looking for self-starters, self-learning. They're, to Margaret's point, not checking off every single box. In fact, I was on a roundtable with some employers a couple months ago, and they were supposed to review job descriptions for, are these the relevant, skills? And none of them could agree on it. And what they could all agree on is, that we want self-starters, people perhaps with hands-on lab experience, people who know how to program or, software logic, who can turn themselves into various different things. Remember, this is a nascent industry. It's a nascent field. And if you're adventuresome, and you really want to learn a lot of different things, like, I'm well up in years and I'm just in love with this field, so there's so much about it that's fascinating. And so approach it that way. The companies coming are really happy to talk to you and plant seeds and, try to tell you the kinds of things they're looking for, but it changes quickly and they're growing and getting entrepreneurial investment, many of them very quickly as well. So
Can I say one more thing, which is, classical computing over the years went from being kind of this Wild West open frontier where anyone was welcome because we didn't have stereotypes, to maybe by 1990, everyone had in their head an idea of what a computer scientist or a computer engineer looked like, talked like, knew, and so forth. And we've been laboring for maybe 30, 40 years under the challenge of like getting away from those stereotypes. The nice thing about quantum to me is it's wide open again. And people don't have an idea of what the stereotype looks like. So help us create a quantum ecosystem that sort of bashes through a lot of those stereotypes.
Yes, and that's the best closing remark I could think of. So it's great. Plus, it gives you a great line when you're at a party when they go, "What do you work on?" Go, "I work on quantum computing," and they go, "What?" That's like crazy. Well, so thank you. We'll try to get to other questions, I guess, Lauren and TJ, as we can offline, but I'm going to hand it back over to you, Lauren, and give you a chance to wrap it all up.
Great. Thank you so, so much. This has really been so enlightening. Thank you, Margaret, for joining us. Thank you, Lucy, for joining us. Yes, throw your applauses and the reactions on the chat. Thank you to the audience for joining us. I want to invite you all to take our survey. I think TJ is going to paste that link in the chat. So don't leave before you grab the survey link. We really appreciate your feedback on today's session. And for all of the ASU community members here, we highly encourage you to sign up for the career fair. Get to know some of the quantum computing companies that want to hire you and want to work with you, want to hire you as interns. We will be sharing out the recording of this video. We will answer some of these questions on the backside offline and send a follow-up email with everyone who registered. We just appreciate everyone's presence so much. And I'm going to wrap it up because we all got the rest of our days to go to. But thank you so much, everyone. I wish you all a great day.
Thank you all. Take care.
Well.